"Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice a little too loud. He leaned an arm against the wall next to her, crowding her space. "Don't see many ladies in here by themselves. Everything all right?" Michelle didn't look up from her glass. "Everything's fine." He chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "Just making sure. Gotta look out for our own." He glanced at her simple top and jeans. "You a spouse? Waiting for your husband to get off duty?" "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were calm, steady. They held a depth that seemed to momentarily surprise him. He recovered quickly, a smirk sliding back onto his face. "Oh, so you were in then. Let me guess." He tapped his chin in mock thought. "Admin? Supply? My buddy over there is betting you were a POG, a person other than Grunt." His friend snickered. Michelle took a slow sip of her water. She'd heard it all before. The condescending questions, the automatic assumptions. For years it had been a constant low-grade friction against her life, an abrasive texture she'd learned to smooth over with silence and patience. Tonight, she was tired. She just wanted to be left alone. "I served," she said, hoping the simple confirmation would be enough. It wasn't. It was an opening. "Yeah? What was your MOS?" he pressed, using the Marine term for a job specialty. "I was 0311, infantry, a real grunt." He said it with a flourish, as if revealing a royal title. "We called it an AFSC," she replied evenly. The sergeant's smirk widened. "AFSC? Oh, you were a chair force pilot, huh?" He laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Flying desks from 9 to 5. What was your call sign, sweetheart?" "Sparkles." His friends howled with laughter from the booth. The joke, stale and unoriginal, landed exactly as they'd hoped. It was meant to belittle, to put her in a box labeled lesser. Michelle's hand rested on the table, her fingers still. She didn't rise to the bait. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable. This quiet defiance seemed to needle him more than any angry retort could have. His ego, fueled by alcohol in an audience, demanded a reaction. He needed to prove his dominance in this small, grimy corner of the world. "No, seriously," he insisted, leaning closer. The smell of cheap whiskey was strong on his breath. "You can tell us. We're all family here, right? All us trigger pullers and door kickers." He gestured vaguely between them, a circle that pointedly excluded her. "You look like you've never even held a rifle." He was trying to get a rise out of her to make her angry or flustered, but Michelle's mind had long ago built calluses against such barbs. Her calm was a fortress he couldn't breach with playground taunts. She had learned patience in places he couldn't imagine, under pressures that would have crushed his casual bravado into dust. She knew that men like this, loud and insecure, were often just boys playing a role they thought the world expected of them. "I'm just trying to have a quiet drink," she said, her voice still level. "I'd appreciate it if you'd go back to your friends." This was the wrong thing to say. It was a dismissal, a rejection of his perceived authority. His face hardened. The playful condescension curdled into something uglier. "See, now you're being disrespectful," he said, his voice lowering. "All I did was ask you a simple question. You say you served, but you won't say what you did. You won't even tell us your call sign. Makes a guy wonder if you served at all." One of his friends called from the booth. "Hey, Miller, maybe she's one of those stolen Valor types. Ask to see her VA card." The Sergeant Miller straightened up, a new idea gleaming in his eyes. "That's a good point. You got any proof you were in? A military ID? A VA card? Anything?" He was challenging her directly now, in front of the dozen or so patrons who were pretending not to watch. The bartender, a tired-looking man with a stained towel over his shoulder, made a half-hearted move to intervene. "Hey, fellas, leave the lady alone." Miller shot him a glare that sent him retreating back to the safety of his beer taps. "This is military business. Stay out of it." He turned back to Michelle. His eyes fell on the keychain she'd placed on the table next to her water. On it was a small pewter charm, its details worn smooth with time. It was a bird of prey, an eagle, its wings swept back for a dive. He pointed at it with a thick finger. "What's that little toy?" he sneered. "You get that in a Happy Meal. A little prize for being the best file clerk in the squadron." Michelle's fingers instinctively moved to cover the charm. Of all the things he had said, that one comment so casually cruel was the one that found a crack in her composure. Not anger, but a deep, resonant ache. A memory flickered, unbidden. The worn metal of the eagle charm felt heavy in her memory, not like pewter, but like the dense, shuddering weight of a fully loaded F-15E Strike Eagle banking hard under 7 Gs. The charm wasn't a toy, it was a symbol, a reminder. The memory was sharp, visceral. The world outside the canopy was a terrifying, abstract blur of green night vision and the angry red blossoms of anti-aircraft artillery rising to meet them. Below, in a valley whose name was a synonym for hell, a Marine platoon was pinned down, their radio calls growing more frantic. The word "danger close" was repeated, a prayer and a warning. Her hands flew across the controls of the weapons systems, her mind a cold, clear calculator of death and salvation. The scream of the engines was a constant roar, but inside her helmet there was only the sound of her own steady breathing and the calm, clipped voice of her pilot. The jolt of the ordnance leaving the pylon was a physical punctuation mark in the chaos. The Eagle was diving, just like the charm. It was a promise of fire and steel delivered from a dark sky. That little pewter toy was a piece of that promise, a token of a night spent trading pieces of her soul to keep a platoon of boys just like the one in front of her now, alive. In a dimly lit corner of the bar, a man sat alone, his back to the wall. He was older, with the quiet, observant stillness of a career non-commissioned officer. Chief Master Sergeant Williams, retired, had been enjoying a rare beer in peace. He'd seen the young Marines come in, loud and full of themselves, and had paid them little mind, but he'd been watching the interaction at the woman's table with a growing sense of irritation. He'd seen this show 100 times. Young bucks, fresh from a deployment or a tough training cycle, trying to prove their mettle by belittling someone they perceived as weaker. But then he'd gotten a clearer look at the woman, the way she held herself, the unyielding calm in her posture. There was something familiar about her. When the Marine Miller had jabbed his finger at her keychain, the dim light caught the shape of the eagle. Not just any eagle, a strike eagle. William sat up straighter. His mind, a finely tuned catalog of faces, units, and reputations from a 30-year career, started clicking through files. The blonde hair, the calm eyes, the quiet authority. It couldn't be. He leaned forward, trying to get a better angle. The name was on the tip of his tongue, a legend from his time as the flight line chief at Bagram. A pilot, no, a WSO, a Wizzo, known for her preternatural calm under fire, the one they gave a name to, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. Miller's voice, now laced with genuine suspicion, cut through the bar's low hum. "I'm serious. You got 1 minute to show me some ID, or I'm calling the MPs myself. We don't take kindly to stolen valor." That was it. Williams had seen enough. The insult was too grave, the ignorance too profound. He pulled out his phone, his movements economical and precise. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he hadn't used in years, a number he kept for true emergencies. It rang twice. "Evans," a sharp voice answered. "Colonel Evans, this is Chief Williams, retired," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Sorry to bother you at this hour, sir." "Chief, what's wrong?" There was immediate concern in the colonel's voice. He knew Williams wasn't one for social calls. "Sir, I'm at a dive called the Rusty Anchor, just off base. There's a situation here. A few of the local Marines are harassing a woman, accusing her of stolen valor." There was a sigh on the other end. "Damn it. All right, Chief. I'll call the Marine liaison and have them send the MPs to sort it out. You shouldn't have to deal with this." "Sir, with all due respect, I don't think you understand," Williams said, his voice dropping even lower, imbued with a cold gravity. "The woman they're cornering, it's Major Green." Silence. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the crackle of the connection. "Say again, Chief." Colonel Evans's voice was suddenly stripped of all weariness, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "Major Michelle Green, sir. Iron Lady Green. I'm looking right at her, and this Marine sergeant is about 2 seconds from putting his hands on her." The line went dead. Williams didn't need a response. He knew what was coming. He slipped his phone back into his pocket, took a long, slow sip of his beer, and settled in to watch the show. The cavalry, he knew, was on its way. Inside the base command center, the atmosphere shifted from routine late-night monitoring to crackling urgency. Colonel Evans stood ramrod straight, the phone still in his hand. "Get me everything you have on a Major Michelle Green, USAF, retired." He snapped at the young airman on duty, who nearly jumped out of his skin. He then jabbed a button on his intercom. "Colonel Jackson, my office. Now." Seconds later, his deputy commander, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with silver oak leaves on her shoulders, strode in. "Sir, we have a 4-alarm fire at a civilian establishment. One of ours is involved." On the main screen, the airman had pulled up the file. It bloomed across the monitor, a stark black-and-white summary of a remarkable career. Major Michelle M. Green. Status, retired. Aircraft, FIF-15, E-Strike Eagle. Flight hours, 2,840. Combat hours, 912. Then came the list of decorations. The Air Medals, each with an oak leaf cluster, the Meritorious Service Medal, and near the top a citation that made Colonel Evans and Colonel Jackson both draw a sharp breath, the Distinguished Flying Cross with V device for Valor. The citation summary scrolled onto the screen. It spoke of a mission over hostile territory, a friendly ground unit about to be overrun. It mentioned a damaged aircraft, a wounded wingman, and a series of weapons deployments so precise and so daring that they broke the enemy assault and saved dozens of lives. The final line of the report was a quote from the ground commander, a Marine captain. The voice in the sky that night was the calmest thing I've ever heard. We called her the Iron Lady. She saved my entire company. Colonel Evans's face was like granite. She saved a Marine company, and now a Marine sergeant is accusing her of stolen valor. The irony is thick enough to choke on. He looked at Jackson. Get the command vehicles. Full lights, no sirens. I want the Marine First Sergeant from the base liaison office to meet us there. Tell him it's a Code 1 issue regarding one of his NCOs and a DFC recipient. Colonel Jackson was already moving, her expression grim. On my way, sir. The institutional gears were grinding into motion, a massive, unstoppable force now aimed at one dingy, insignificant bar. Back at the Rusty Anchor, Miller was basking in what he believed was his impending victory. Michelle's continued silence was, in his mind, an admission of guilt. He had her cornered, exposed as a fraud. He felt a surge of self-righteous power. He was policing his community, defending the honor of the uniform he wore. Time's up, he declared, pulling his own phone from his pocket with a dramatic flourish. I'm making the call. You've got one last chance to come clean. Just admit you bought that little keychain online and we can all forget this happened. His friends were leaning forward in their booth. The other patrons had fallen into a heavy silence. The only sounds were the hum of the beer cooler and the tapping of Miller's thumb on his phone screen as he prepared to dial the military police. You're making a mistake, Michelle said, her voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a razor. It wasn't a plea, it was a statement of fact. A final quiet warning. He scoffed. The only mistake here was you, walking into a bar full of real veterans and telling lies. He was about to press the call button when a series of bright strobing lights, red and blue, flashed through the bar's grimy front windows, washing the room in a surreal, pulsating glow. Miller paused, confused. He hadn't even made the call yet. Then came the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside, the crunch of tires on the gravel parking lot. Heavy doors opened and slammed shut in quick succession. The front door of the Rusty Anchor swung open, and the entire atmosphere of the room changed. It wasn't the MPs. It was something far more intimidating. Colonel Evans entered first, his uniform immaculate, the silver eagle of his rank seeming to absorb and command the dim light. Behind him was Colonel Jackson, her presence equally formidable, and behind them a Marine First Sergeant, a man whose face was a roadmap of deployments and whose posture radiated pure, unadulterated authority. Several other uniformed personnel filed in behind them, forming a silent, imposing rank just inside the doorway. They didn't look around. They didn't scan the room. Their eyes, all of them, locked onto the scene at Michelle's table. The jukebox, which had been playing a forgotten rock anthem, seemed to sputter and die. The air in the bar became heavy, thick, and impossible to breathe. Miller and his friends froze, their drunken bravado evaporating like mist in a desert sun. They looked like children caught drawing on the walls with permanent marker. Colonel Evans strode forward, his polished black shoes making no sound on the sticky floor. He walked with a purpose that parted the very air in front of him. He didn't so much as glance at the stunned Sergeant Miller. His entire focus was on the woman in the blue top. He stopped 2 feet from her table. In the ringing silence of the bar, he drew himself to his full height, his movements crisp and precise. He raised his right hand in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. "Major Green," he said, his voice clear and resonant, filling every corner of the room. "Colonel Evans, base commander. On behalf of the entire command, I want to apologize for this disgraceful interruption to your evening." Michelle looked up at him, a flicker of surprise in her calm eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Colonel Evans held his salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. Only then did he turn his head, his gaze falling upon Sergeant Miller. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Sergeant," the colonel's voice was dangerously quiet now, stripped of all warmth. "You were asking for this woman's call sign." Miller, pale and trembling, could only stammer. "Sir, I didn't know. You are standing in the presence of Major Michelle Green, United States Air Force, retired," Colonel Evans announced, his voice rising again, a public proclamation. Her peers and the grateful men she protected on the ground gave her a call sign. "It is Iron Lady." He let the name hang in the air for a beat. A name she earned over the skies of the Korengal Valley. A name she solidified when her F-15E took heavy anti-aircraft fire while flying her third consecutive close air support mission of the night, refusing to leave her station because a platoon of United States Marines was about to be overrun. She stayed in the fight, her aircraft bleeding hydraulic fluid and riddled with holes until every single one of those Marines was safe. He took a step closer to Miller, his eyes boring into the young sergeant. She is a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross for Valor. She has more combat hours in the air than you have months in the service. She has saved more lives than you have ever met. The colonel paused, letting the weight of his words settle on the entire silent bar. You asked her for proof of service, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. Sergeant, this woman's entire career is proof that heroes don't always announce themselves. They don't have to. A glass slipped from Miller's nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor. The sharp, splintering sound was the only noise in the bar. It was the sound of his world breaking. His friends in the booth looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. The Marine First Sergeant stepped forward, his eyes locked on Miller. His voice was a low growl, a promise of misery. Sergeant Miller, on your feet. Miller scrambled to stand, nearly tripping over his own chair. You will be at my office tomorrow morning at 0500. In your service, Charlie's, ready for inspection. You will bring a pen and a blank notebook. Your education, it appears, is severely lacking. We are going to fix that. Until I am satisfied you understand what the words honor, courage, and commitment actually mean, your life will be mine. Do you understand me? Yes, First Sergeant, Miller whispered, his voice cracking. Michelle finally spoke, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. She stood up, addressing the colonel but looking at the terrified young Marine. Colonel, with all due respect, this isn't necessary. Everyone looked at her. He's just a kid, she said softly. She turned her gaze to Miller, and there was no triumph in it, only a quiet weariness. The uniform doesn't give you a free pass to be a jerk, and it doesn't make you better than the person sitting next to you. The standard is the standard. It has to be the same for everyone, man or woman, officer or enlisted, grunt or pilot. Don't try to soften the standards for people you think are weaker. Just learn to apply them to everyone, fairly. That's all that matters. Her words were not a rebuke but a lesson, a piece of hard-won wisdom offered in a moment of grace. It was more devastating to Miller's pride than any shouting ever could be. In that moment, another flash of memory hit her, this one answering the question Miller had so crudely asked, the origin of the name. It wasn't just the Korengal mission, it was a month later, an engine fire on her wingman's jet. The pilot was a young panic lieutenant on his first combat tour. The radio was filled with his frantic, terrified calls. Through the static, her voice cut in, impossibly calm. She talked him through the emergency procedures step by step, her tone never wavering, even as her own systems blared with proximity warnings. She stayed with him, a steady voice in the dark, until he was safely on the ground. When she landed, the squadron commander had met her on the tarmac. Your hands are made of stone, Major, he'd said, shaking his head in disbelief. Your will is made of iron. The name stuck. The fallout was both immediate and lasting. Colonel Evans personally escorted Michelle out of the bar, apologizing again. The Marine First Sergeant marched a shattered Sergeant Miller out to a separate vehicle. The silence they left behind in the rusty anchor was profound, broken only by the bartender sweeping up the pieces of the fallen glass. In the weeks that followed, a quiet but significant shift occurred on the base. Colonel Evans, in conjunction with the Marine leadership, instituted a new mandatory joint service professional development seminar for all NCOs and junior officers. The first session was led by Colonel Jackson, and it focused on the history of women in combat roles across all branches. New posters appeared in barracks and common areas, featuring the faces of decorated women veterans, their stories told in brief, powerful paragraphs. The gate identification procedures were updated with a specific addendum about verifying credentials respectfully and without assumption. It was a small institutional course correction, a direct result of one ugly night in a dive bar. About a month later, Michelle was in the base commissary, picking up groceries. She was in the cereal aisle when a hesitant voice said her name. "Ma'am? Major Green?" She turned. It was Miller. He was alone in civilian clothes. He looked younger, smaller, and profoundly humbled. He stood ramrod straight, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sergeant," she said, her voice neutral. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize." "Properly," he said, looking her directly in the eye. "There's no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant, disrespectful, and I was wrong. What you said in the bar about the standard, First Sergeant has had me writing essays about it. But I needed to say it to you, I'm sorry. The apology was direct, with no qualifiers. It was earnest. Michelle studied him for a long moment. She saw the boy behind the bravado, the flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. She gave a slow nod. Apology accepted, Sergeant, she said. She turned back to the shelves, grabbing a box of Cheerios. Then, as an afterthought, she looked back at him. Learn from it. It's the most important thing we do in the service. Learn from your mistakes, and be better tomorrow. He just nodded, a lump in his throat. Yes, ma'am. He stood there for a moment longer before turning and walking away, a little straighter, a little wiser. The story of Iron Lady reminds us that heroes wear many uniforms, and their valor isn't always loud. It's often found in quiet strength and unwavering standards. If you believe in honoring the valor of all who serve, like this video, subscribe to She Chose Valor, and share this story so her legacy is never forgotten.